Welcome to the Miles to Zen podcast. I'm so happy you have found this podcast today. And today's topic is about selling your parents' home. And it could quite possibly be your childhood home, which could add a whole nother level of complexity to things. I recently just sold my parents' home. This was a week ago. And I wanted to share my journey with you. So if you are going through something like this, you know that you aren't alone. And if you are about to embark on this now or sometime in the future, I hope my experience can help you save yourself a few moments of grief along the way, or give you some ideas on how it can be more enjoyable, and most importantly, not to lose your Zen. So let me set the scene. In 2023, I was the VP at a clean energy company, leading a fabulous team and had a really busy job that was full of purpose that you did not leave at the office. I also have a husband and a son who hadn't quite reached teenage years when things started. And I had just done the sales job of my life the year previous and got my parents into an assisted living retirement home. My mom has Alzheimer's and my dad has some memory issues as well. And I knew that this was going to be tough. And I am so grateful that I had the time to do it. And I guess I didn't really have the time during the crunch periods as my family and my mental, emotional, physical health suffered. But I was grateful to touch my childhood so closely and grateful to honor my parents' things. And I've come to realize actually that going through their things was really about honoring the connections that were made through those things and the memories that were made. And the to-do list of what I thought I was handling in the end was, in fact, only part of the journey. In this episode, I will cover how to start, the things you need to have in place, choosing a realtor, how to get rid of things, and the stories of how I navigated this and came out the other side. Now, the farm was originally bought by my parents in 1972, and the only time it had changed title before that was 1911. And it was last week that I handed over the keys to the realtor to give to the new owners. And what a journey this has been. It's a huge thing, dismantling one's childhood home. It is overwhelming, and it is far too much to cover in one episode, but I'm going to do my best and take the highlights of what happened over the last couple of years. So this property was a hobby farm, and at the height of things, we had 39 cows, 2 horses, 5 chickens, 1 dog, and 1 to 13 cats. And I tell you all of this because it impacts all of the farm equipment that we also had to get rid of. Now, I'll interchange the I's and the we's throughout here in that I had help, as I'll go into, from my brother and his family, and of course from my husband and my son and numerous friends. But my brother doesn't live in town. So if he was coming to help, it meant that he was taking a flight. And often these tasks will end up falling to one sibling, if you have siblings more than others, because of proximity. If anyone's interested in hearing more about a particular aspect of this, please let me know and I can do another podcast. So I had looked at purchasing the farm with my husband about 10 years ago. And at the time we couldn't make it work. And you know when there's a case of you're pushing something, you think you want something, and you're pushing and pushing, and it's not working? Well, at the time, I didn't realize if you're pushing so hard, it probably isn't the right move. In retrospect, the fact that we couldn't make it work was a gift. Now, my parents had been on the farm for 53 years and were moving and had moved into a one-bedroom retirement home. And they were socially acceptable hoarders, meaning that because they had an attic and a barn, they had a place to put all this stuff. So to the outside, it didn't look like they had a lot. But when you started to dig, holy smokes, there was a lot of stuff. And the thing with selling a family home is it is never neutral, especially if it's not necessarily a happy time. And there's often such a mixture of emotions. I always thought my dad would leave the farm in a box just because he loved the place. Him and I were both lovers of the farm. We loved the property. We knew every single shrub, tree, the way the land sloped, the way it flooded in certain areas, the way certain types of grass and trees would grow in different parts of the property, the streams, the ponds, all of that. And ultimately, you are dismantling not only a house and a property, but you're dismantling a life, one that my dad was not ready to dismantle. When they moved, they had barely wanted to move any of their stuff with them. But my mom and dad had to move in that my mom with her Alzheimer's was going to burn the house down. And my dad, having some memory troubles, had a vastly different perspective of reality than I did. And doing this stuff, wrapping up a childhood home, you're revisiting your childhood. Or if it's, a family home, you're revisiting all these memories. So to get into some of the nitty-gritty, before you can even list the property or hire a realtor, you need to have a few legal things in place. And I plan to do a podcast on parents and aging and the things to remember, which we'll talk more about this. But if you are acting on someone else's behalf, you need to have a power of attorney document, at least in Canada. And if you have multiple siblings, this could get complicated. So get yourself sorted as soon as possible and make sure it is airtight and signed by a lawyer. Just wait until I tell you what happened to us. It is also super handy to have a bank card to their account to pay for dump runs, junk trucks, all of the stuff. When we started looking at the property to get ready for sale, it was so overwhelming. We didn't know where to start. And I'll share some pictures of this, of the farm and such on Instagram. And in Mary Kondo's book, I think the magic art of tidying up, she talks about doing things in an order of doing the easiest things first and saving the harder things for last. This was gold advice because at least then I was able to start. And I ended up saving my room and the attic and the pictures for last. I still haven't finished the pictures. And in fact, as I speak, I'm surrounded by boxes of pictures that I will deal with because I'm not leaving this to anyone else. And if I didn't Marie Kondo my way through this stuff, I would have gotten stuck. There are two parts to finally listing your place on the market. One is getting the place ready for pictures, and the second is getting it ready for showings. Now, it was an every weekend kind of activity for a few months, and then 6 weeks before the pictures, I took every single Friday off and went out all day, Saturday and Sunday, and started just taking action. And depending on where we were in the process, and started taking action. I eventually stopped the Fridays, but depending where things were, I had to do a visit every few weeks to pick up mail and more often when needed. And as I mentioned, my parents had 50 plus years of hoarding, and some of it came back to bite me in the butt, quite frankly, because the stuff that I was ready to get rid of at some point, my mom would say, "Oh, don't worry about it. We have room in the attic. Why don't you just keep it?" I'm horrified to say that a lot of the stuff I found in the attic was mine. I found tons of my old university papers. If they weren't in the attic, they were in the garage. If they weren't in the garage, they were in the barn. And every single art project and test that my brother and I ever did from kindergarten on was stored in the house. And the one thing that I didn't expect to be doing in my lifetime was becoming a secondhand farm equipment salesperson. I called it Shannon's Used Farm Equipment Emporium. So anyone who's versed in farm equipment, I sold tedders, balers, rakes, fertilizer spreaders, manure spreader. I sold it all and encountered just a humongous amount of flakes on Marketplace. But in the end, I managed to sell most of the equipment. I did not manage to sell barely any of the things that they had in their house. Eventually, we just donated or we put it on free on the Buy Nothing groups, and just had a ton of people come through. One of the good pieces of advice: if somebody offers to take a lot more stuff, let them. Let them take as much stuff as they need whenever they show interest. Because when you get down to the crunch, when you finally actually do have to move off the property, it will be less things that you have to deal with. And those people that came in and took a lot of stuff, I mean, all of it for free, it worked so well for them in that they managed to furnish a whole house practically, and they were happy and I was happy because we didn't have to pay for another junk truck to come in and get it. One of the true blessings of this entire process was all the people that came out of the woodwork to help. We had over 20 different people come to help us. That first round, it was bad. There was a lot of very intense clearing, a lot of clearing and cleaning in the house. Things, as you may notice with your parents, like were numerous science projects in the fridge. And these were things like people would ask, well, how did you not notice this stuff earlier? Well, for anyone who's busy in their career and has kids and is running around, you go out and you visit your parents, and you may even visit them once a week, but you're going for a visit. You're not going to look through their fridge and see that they've not been taking care of the property, or that the barn's structure is in question, or any of these things. And people with memory issues, they can hide things very well. And then my mom, a few years back, broke her hip, which really sent the Alzheimer's into a spiral. Then we were going out there and we were focusing on their immediate needs. And even if we had noticed, I mean, we had an idea that things were not being kept up, it was really hard to take any action because we were leading such busy lives ourselves. And also, my dad kept on telling me that he would do it. Anyways, so as I mentioned, that first go around was super intense. And my friends that helped out in this initial round, amazing, godsends. There was some screaming that came from the shed at one point when the mouse house was discovered, and more screaming when the tenants of that house made a quick exit. And the books, the boxes and boxes of them. In the end, we had childhood friends, my parents' friends, relatives, And of course, my husband and my son all helping so much along the way. And everything from helping on the farm, but also helping with childcare and also helping be that emotional ear that you may need. I had scheduled numerous breakdowns. I was, working through them. I would go into the back 40 and have a little breakdown and know that I had a few breakdowns left, and just friends who are able to listen when you're driving the hour back to our place away from the farm was so helpful. And it just made everything feel a little bit lighter. We also had our neighbors come and help, and these neighbors were godsends. One said to me, "Your parents made my childhood. I will help out with anything that they need." And he was so happy to help. And he was amazing. And that was such a fabulous connection that we got to rekindle. We got to remember all the things we did when we were kids. And then there was another neighbor that, had such a great relationship with my parents. And he came up and he helped me with all the farm equipment. And in the end, he even sold the tractor for me. I mean, truly amazing people just came out of the woodwork. And I was so happy that I was able to accept the help. And in the end, I realized it wasn't so much the dismantling of stuff. It was the sharing of memories, the community, and the relationships my parents had nurtured that showed up, and my community of friends that showed up for me whenever I needed the physical help, an ear, or childcare. And that was the best part. It was a lovely surprise in the whole process. And if you don't want to burden people, that's why you're not calling them. Humans love to feel needed. They love to feel connected. And I didn't call the same people over and over again. I paid some friends who I knew could use the money. But really think about that. I had relatives that I barely even talked to, and they turned out to be angels on earth. They're storing the family heirlooms to bring to our reunion. The family heirlooms being, my grandmother's old teacups and old photographs of relatives and paintings of relatives from, Scotland. They all ended up at this one cousin's place, and she came out and even helped me sort through photos, and it was amazing. Now, you know that TV show about treasures in the attic? Well, we certainly had treasures, but nothing to monetize. Like my grandmother's teacups, we had old typewriters, my mom's wedding dress, which was a mini dress, a ton of Christmas decorations. And because I wanted to honor my parents and make sure I didn't miss anything and treat their prized possessions with some love and care, I didn't want these things to go to the landfill. So I really wanted to be careful about what I was just going to throw out. So I couldn't go in there and do like a 2-week, everything goes in the garbage. And especially with my mom's disease, she had a thing with tissues and plastic Ziploc bags, so many. And she wrapped up everything in tissues and then stuck them in plastic bags. And at one point, I'm cleaning out her dresser drawer, and I found her wedding ring, which was her wedding ring and my grandmother's together. And it was wrapped up in tissue, mixed with some miscellaneous paper, put into a plastic baggie, wrapped up with more things, put into another bag, and basically at the back of this drawer. So I really felt like I had to go through things super carefully. And I was so glad to have found that, as well as some nice sentimental things that mean a lot to me, but perhaps don't mean much to anybody else. And in the end, we had probably 30 loads that went to charities who accepted things. And to keep in mind, some charities make things really easy to donate. And when you are sending truckloads, like the back of a truck full, you want someplace that's easy to donate. And we weren't donating junk. We were sorting through it and such. And some places just make it easier. So keep that in mind and keep an idea of roughly what people will take. We probably also had about 10 truckloads that went to recycling and to the dump. And there was at least 5 of the junk trucks, like the big ones. We got rid of mattresses and old pillows and stuff that was just awful. And that ended up going on the junk truck. And it was tough to realize that not too many people want any of the old wood furniture. My parents had some beautiful wood furniture, and no one really wanted it. At the end, we had the junk trucks were there, and I was going to have to give away or load one of these old, beautiful wood tables into the junk truck. And then I was keeping one of the wood tables. Whether I give it away later, I'm not sure, but I couldn't stomach the idea of throwing 2 of these tables out. I had them online for ages trying to get rid of these tables. And at the very end, when the junk truck was there loading things up, I got a message from one of my listings, and their son was heading off to university and needed a table. Needless to say, we also had a truck full of things that we were donating, and we were able to kit this guy out with a ton of things before he went off to university. It was such a win, and I was so pleased not to see their beloved dining room table go into the... And although I have way more boxes in my garage than I'd like to admit, I'm giving myself plenty of compassion as I go through things and buy myself a little bit more time to get through some of the more sentimental items. I think I am almost cured of my need to hang on to things. This was an exceptional lesson in decluttering, moving things along, letting go of things, realizing that the things we love are just because of the memories and the connections we had with them. It's not the things. So that was that. Now, I wanted to talk briefly about picking the right realtor and having the right realtor. Now, this was a bit of a bumpy journey for us, finding the realtor that we wanted to work with. And it's so important that you have a really good relationship with your realtor, and it is one that works for you, not your parents. Now, I know that it's hard to wrap your head around that sometimes, but especially if you are carrying the bulk of this load on your own and your siblings are out of the vicinity, or your parents aren't able to work on the legal documents with you, or are not really up to speed with what's going on, you need to choose someone who really resonates with you. And we chose someone who was local, and she came recommended from a friend. And quite frankly, she just had a great vibe. And because I was so emotionally attached to the property, I knew that I couldn't have a realtor who was very all business with me. I needed one who was going to understand how attached I was to the property, and one that didn't discount the things that I was saying, and one that I felt really listened. And she continued to listen. And most importantly, I felt heard. And I don't know, some people wouldn't need that as much as others. But for me, it was really important. I wanted to have a really close relationship with this realtor because I wanted the buyer of this property to be the right buyer. I wanted the next steward of this land, not someone who was going to build an industrial meat farm. This wasn't just a money transaction for my parents that I was organizing. It was really the handing over of a property that was so special that had only exchanged hands or it only had 2 titles in its life in the land registry. So it was really important to me. And the road to find that buyer was a bumpy one. The first one was perfect. I loved them. They stepped onto the property. Supposedly, they started crying in the middle of the field because it was so perfect for them. Unfortunately, they couldn't get their financing together. The next buyer was a complete nightmare and backed out 5 days before possession because of financial issues. And they'd originally had no subjects. I think what happened is they realized the place was a bit more than they could handle. And remember when I mentioned the importance of having a rock solid power of attorney? Well, we didn't get to keep the deposit based on a technicality because the power of attorney that I signed was valid, but my brother signed the contract, and his power of attorney in the province that he lives in was needing to have 2 lawyers witness the signing of the document. In British Columbia, where I live, you only need 1 lawyer. So based on that technicality, we unfortunately couldn't get to hold the deposit, which was a bit of a drag because these guys kept the property locked up from May till November of last year. So it's really important to make sure that your legal documents are all in order. The family that did eventually purchase the property, they have kids and they wanted their kids to have the nature space, which was perfect. So the last thing I did at the farm was, in fact, have a glass of bubbly with my realtor, shared a few stories, and toasted ourselves for surviving the last 2 years. The saying goodbye, it was strange to say goodbye in the end, because in the end, there was no goodbye. I'd already done it. I'd even scheduled 2 more breakdowns on my to-do list, as I had had plenty before. And just when I was looking to leave the house and walk around the property, the heavens opened and I didn't have a rain jacket. And for a solid 5 minutes, it was raining nonstop, almost like saying, you've done it. You've said goodbye. You don't need to walk the property one last time. And so I'd left. And I had said goodbye. I'd said goodbye hundreds of times to the land, the trees, the house, my childhood room. And this time I could just go. And if anything, these last 2 years of having the farm listed gave me time to process. It gave me time to come to terms with the end of this era. It gave me time to realize the journey my parents had made and why they made the decisions they did, why they saddled us with that whole farm. And I was able to forgive them and understand where their head was at and how they just got stuck. And then with their mental challenges, looking through their things made me realize that my mom's Alzheimer's had started so much earlier than we had realized. And so once again, I was so thankful to all the friends who offered the support, the physical, mental, emotional, and that was a gift from the farm, the gift of connection. And funnily enough, the morning I was handing over the keys, I had such a weird dream. And I was just about to die in a rather dramatic fashion. And it felt like the release from the property. Often I was looking for that light at the end of the tunnel, praying it wasn't a freight train because it had been a lot. But one thing I've often said is, what opens up when I put the farm down? And now I'm finding out. So stay tuned on the Miles to Zen podcast as I share what's opening up. And in fact, this podcast is really part of that. I appreciate you all so much for listening to this story, and hopefully you've heard some tips that can help you if you're in the middle of this. I would love to know in the comments if you're going through this or if you've gone through this and what you think. And let me know if you'd like to hear any more stories about the farm. I have some fabulous animal stories, some ghost stories, and so much more. And of course, an upcoming podcast on aging parents. So please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe if you enjoyed the podcast. And I can't wait to come back to you next week with another episode. Thanks again for listening. Bye for now.